Okay, Mr. Woolbright, tell us that story you were about to tell us about Mr. Flagler.
Well, Henry Flagler run the railroad from West Palm Beach into Miami in 1896. And Major Boynton come down and homesteaded. I think it was a quarter section. I'm not sure. It might have been a half section, because he was a Union soldier, a veteran. And he came down and he built that hotel. That was somewhere around 1905, 1903, 1905. And then, as you go back in that, the railroads were required by the federal government to transport veteran soldiers homestead goods free of charge. So Boynton loaded up two railroad cars of household goods, he says, and Flagler had to call them from Jacksonville down to Boynton there with no charge. But then he found out later that what those household goods were was the furnishings for the Boynton Hotel, which were not homestead goods. And he forbid any first-class train that the FEC run from stopping in Boynton. Absolutely. And a sequel to that, when I come back from my war service, I served in the European Theater of Operations. I was in the Navy. And I just come back from overseas in April. And I think I was coming home for May for my R&R. I had a month leave. And of course, traveling in my uniform, and I had some campaign ribbons on that thing, and one of them had a battle star in it. And when the train came to Fort Pierce, now I was on this Florida Special, which was a fast train through. And when the Fort Pierce, they changed crews, and the conductor come around checking tickets, and he looked at me and he says, "Oh, you're going to Delray Beach, are you?" I said, "No, I really live in Boynton, but this train it doesn't stop in Boynton." So I went through to Delray. He says, "Anybody meeting you?" I said, "No, I didn't even have time to send them a telegram." So it's because when I went down to see if there's reservations available, they was, and I got on the train and come on down. So he just said, "Stand by." And when the train pulled out of West Palm Beach, he's a sailor, he says, "Get your gear together and meet back here on the vestibule." And when that train crossed the Boynton Canal, he reached up and grabbed that emergency cord and jerked down on it, and that train come to a stop, fire flying, and everybody that's in town coming and standing and looking. The first thing they thought it hit something. But what was it? The conductor come down, put the little chair, and here comes old Tom. But they said, I'm walking right down the center of town. And a lot of them never forgot that.
Let's go back a little bit. What was the process like for your father and other farmers in the area to get their goods to market? How did that take place?
Well, by the time that happened, the railroad was through. And each one of these little towns had a American Express platform that you could take and ship your stuff by American Express to the northern markets. If you just had a little bit, or if you had a carload, well, they lived to carloads in it. But when Flagler first built that railroad, he built a narrow gauge. So you couldn't ship a carload of pineapples, for instance, and they had to Jacksonville. They had to be reloaded into another car because all the rest of the railroads coming in were standard gauge. And my dad got a little bit miffed at Flagler on that, and he would direct all of his shipping would go from Boynton by railroad to Jacksonville, and then it was loaded on one of these coastwise freight steamers. The most popular one was the Merchant and Miners Transportation Company. And then they were shipped they put in at New York, and Philadelphia, and Boston.
By boat?
By boat, yeah.
Wasn't it faster to go by train?
Oh, it'd have been faster, yes, it would have. But then of course, you know, our pineapple crop is a summer crop. It doesn't start being ready for shipment until late June. And by boat, it was a little cooler on those ships because they had the ventilation, you know, that they could run through the cargo. And so really the pineapples arrived in better shape than they did by a freight car, because there was no such a thing as a refrigerated shipping at that time. And well, there's been times there. Well, when Dad finally bought the company out, we were packing and shipping in July 2 cars of pineapples a day. Wow. We had our own siding, our own packing house.
Why did the pineapple crop not survive to this day?
I didn't understand it.
But why do they no longer grow pineapples in Florida as a crop?
Well, there was, of course, Flagler run the railroad down, and then he went to Key West with it, and consequently, Cuban pineapples come out of there. But the main thing that killed the pineapple industry was the land boom of the mid-20s, because we were paying our field hands $1.25 a day, which was a livable wage at that time. But these developers come along and they was paying them $5 a day. Well, we finally got to the point that we couldn't compete. And Dad got a very good price offer for his pineapple holdings that he had, because he had 30 acres in Boynton there, and he had 50 acres in Delray. And so that was all sold out. Of course, all on time. Boynton, that Florida land boom was a interesting era too.
We're going to get to that in just a second. Who were some of the other farmers of prominence in Boynton during that time?
Well, most of the other farmers, because there was about 3, as best I remember, and most of those were in Delray. That is, 2 of the 3 were in Delray. That they had farmed pineapples too, but I think Dad was the only one that left that had pineapples in Boynton.
Who were some of the other farmers? Do you remember them by name?
Well, there was Charlie Mask is one of them. I don't know. Never did know too much about Charlie, except he lived alone. He wasn't married, and he didn't have any children as far as we knew, because when Charlie died, his pineapple field absolutely went to pot. And a pineapple field will do that in 2 years if it's not attended.
Okay, let's get back to that land boom. How much do you recall about the land boom and the impact it had on the community?
Well, that was really an interesting time in the development of Boynton and Delray, and that developing they come down here and And all at once, land prices began to climb very rapidly. And they would, developers began to get in here, you know, and they were laying out subdivisions. Oh God, there were subdivisions all over Palm Beach County, in the eastern section of it anyhow, that absorbed a lot of the farming area, except that around Military Trail, and that it never got out that far. But I remember my dad and I, one time, we went down to the post office in Boynton to get the mail. And this was after Dad had sold his pineapple holdings. And he had a little money he was investing around, and he had invested in some lots there in Boynton. And a fellow walked up to us by the name of Clarence Voss. Clarence used to run a produce market in West Palm Beach, and he bought a lot of pineapples from us during the season there. He'd come down and get what they call the field ripes. And he said to Dad, he said, "Mr. Woolbright," he says, "do you still own certain lots?" Dad says, "Yes, I do." He says, "There's one particular," says, he named it, yeah. Says, "How much you want for it?" Dad said, $2,500. Clarence reached in his pocket, pulled out about $50, and says, "Here's a binder until we can get the abstract of title run up." And while he was standing there talking, another fellow walked up that none of us knew, as far as I know. And he said, "Mr. Woolbright," says, "do you own this lot?" And Dad said, "No, I just sold it to this gentleman." So he turned to Clarence and he said, "Do you want to sell it?" He said, "Yeah, I'll sell it." He says, "How much you want for it?" He says, $3,500. So he pulled out $50, says, "Here's a binder until we can get the title." The third man walked up, and that house and that lot sold for $4,500. And not more than $150 changed hands. Because then everything was, all the legal work was done on what they call the abstract of title, that had to be a written history of the piece of property. And you couldn't get anybody to work in the county offices at the wages that they were paying, and so that was such a jam up and a mess that the legislature finally settled that out, I think in 1944 or 45, when they passed the Murphy Act that would permit tax bodies from selling the property for delinquent taxes and issue a clear title to it. And that kind of straightened that thing out. But then when that bubble burst, it, to me, as I remember, it was the most phenomenal thing in the world. Prior to that, everybody was wanting to buy property. They was running around trying to buy every piece of property they could find. In the same week, it shifted over to everybody wanted to sell. And one day we was sitting out on my mother and father, and I was there with them, and a fella come in from town, and he had a real estate office. And he said to Dad, he says, "You remember that lot out in Boynton Hills there that you expressed an interest in one time?" And Dad says, "Yes." He says, well, "I've put that on the market now for $10,000. Would you like to have it?" Dad says, "No, not interested in that." And they talked on, and that man kept coming down on that price. And the last thing he said was, "Mr. Woolbright, will you give me $100 for that lot?" Dad says, "No, I don't want it." He says, "Why?" He says, "You started out at 10,000, here you're down to 100. He says, "Mr. Woolbright, I'm trying to get enough money together to get back to my northern home." He says, "Because the bottom had fell out of everything. We were in a depression down here in the 25, 26, 27, 28, up until the stock market crash in 29, which threw the rest of the country into depression. But we were in one down here. Banks closed. My dad got a payment on some of the property, went down to the bank in Delray. We didn't have one in Boynton. That one had closed for some reason. And he deposited it in the bank down there. He had a note due at the bank. He had borrowed, I think, $500 or $600. And he went down there 2 days later to take care of the note and to pick up some cash. And there was a sign on the door. The institution named it, says has closed for business. And the trustee made a call on Dad, some week or 10 days later. He says, I want to know about collecting for that $300 or $400 loan that you had. Dad says, fine, whenever you turn loose the $10,000 I just put in there. Well, said, we can't do that. Dad said, well, there must have been some money left in that bank. He said, Mr. Woolbright, when I come in and took over and took inventory, there was not one thin dime of money left in that bank. Not one thin dime. Absolutely cleaned out.
What impact did this crash or this bust have on all your neighbors in the community?
Well, banks got a little bit greedy and a little bit foolish on loaning the money. Because at one time they had plenty of money. And they were loaning it out. Now, when that crash came and the investigations come in, they found that one bank in West Palm Beach, I think they call it the Central Farmers Bank and Trust, that they checked in through the records, and that board of directors had loaned a developer in a little development called Villa Rica that was between Delray and Boca Raton, $750,000 on a third mortgage to develop that property. And of course, whenever that bubble burst and everything else, that property wasn't worth a dime.
Could you see the impact it had on some of the families and on some of your classmates, the bust? Could you see the impact that the bust had on some of the families that you knew and some of the people who were not well-to-do? Just the
well, they weren't as well as they thought they were. Of course, up until that crash came, everybody was running around. They had money, and they were spending the money too. But after that, there was not too many people that had money. And those that did, they were sitting tight on it. I think they had it in a sock or a tin can buried someplace because they didn't put it in banks.
Did it have? Could you see the impact that it had on your classmates?
Oh yeah, yeah. Because all of our families were basically in the same boat, and our classmates that when the year before, all of us wore. We only had to wear a certain suit or unit or dress for a week, because then they got a new one or something happened. But boy, after that, up until in the mid-30s, I guess it was, that people were making do on everything. They'd wear a pair of shoes. As the old saying goes, you could stand on a dime and tell what the date was. and clothes, it was ragged and threadbare, but not to the point of being indecent or anything. But just well-worn clothes.
What about your family? Any impact it had on your family that you can recall?
Well, Dad, up until the stock market crash, he had that income coming in. And so he didn't, it didn't affect us too much. But then when that crash came in the stock market, it wiped out the fellow that had bought our one piece of our property. The rest of the property had been paid off, it is. But this one piece he was still getting $10,000 a year out of. That he wrote Dad a letter and he said that he couldn't make any more payments and to foreclose on the property. My dad looked at the property. The pineapple field had deteriorated. It was gone, and it was nothing but a sand patch. And taxes were pretty high. And of course, during that period, nobody was paying taxes. But anyhow, Dad says, I'll be just as kind to him as he was to me. So he sent him a quitclaim deed for it. And he said, I don't want it. Well, that fella, he couldn't pay taxes on it anymore. And it finally, after that Murphy Act was passed, that 28 acres, because we reserved 2 acres out of it for the home place. That 28 acres went on the tax market, and the fella picked it up for $2,800. And he was going to plant it in mangoes, and he did plant a lot of mangoes in it. But by that time, the Lake Worth Drainage District had drained the property so much that the water table was way low, and so and we were on a hill, and then this property we had was in the valley, and there's another hill up there. And he had to finally give up on that because he was wearing himself out hauling water to those trees to keep them going, and they didn't make it.
I understand, as I recall, back in the early 1920s, there was another guy who did some bank transactions down by you by the name of John Ashley. Do you know any of those stories?
Yeah, John made many withdrawals. He never deposited anything, but he made a lot of withdrawals. And 3 of them that I know of, John robbed them single-handed, dressed as a woman. That here's this old woman coming in. He made himself look old, because John was a young man. He was in his 20s. But he come into the bank, went up to the teller, and she said, I want to make a withdrawal. Pulled out a gun. So he made a withdrawal and walked out of the bank. And they never did catch him until finally they set a trap for him, because they got word that he was going to be up at Sebastian. And they set a trap for John, and they got him and Laura Updegrove, which was his girlfriend, and another boy named Mobley.
Hanford Mobley.
And they caught them in there, and they killed John and Mobley right there. And they didn't kill Laura because she still had family in the area. And then, of course, quite a few months later, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office said that they had caught a boy named Tracy that was one of the Ashley gang. And Tracy Tracy, they always said, was the brains. He done the planning for these bank robberies. And that they found him and were bringing him to West Palm Beach to jail, and he tried to escape. So they shot him down right there at the Boynton Canal.
Were you old enough to remember any of the Boynton bank robberies?
Personally,
Yeah.
no.
This.
No, because they didn't. By the time they became famous as bank robbers, they were, shall we say, out of our realm. I knew they were around. I think it was, I don't know whether it was Cap Baker or Bob Baker, the sheriff. Cap Baker was the first sheriff of Palm Beach County, and Bob Baker was was his son that followed him. But they had heard that John was holed up out west of West Palm Beach at a camp out there, and they were going to go out and capture him. Well, they run as far as they could till the road run out, and the deputies get out, and they're standing around the car, planning on how they were going to sneak up on John, and all at once, somebody cut out with a Winchester lever action and put a shot holes around the radiator, just like that. And of course, those deputies scattered for the bushes whenever that started, but then they had to walk back into town because the radiator wouldn't hold water anymore.
Do we want to get into Mr. Woolbright now about the Yamato colony? Do we want to get into that at all? Different era? Okay. Okay. Okay, Mr. Woolbright, tell us about your high school years. Where did you go to high school, and do you recall any highlights that occurred during your high school years?
Well, I graduated from Boynton High School in 1931.
Where was that school?
It's right downtown. Fact is, I think the county owns it, and they still own it, I think, and they're wanting to tear it down. And there's a group in Boynton that wants to preserve it, but they've approached me for money. I told them no. I was damn glad to get out of that school. I don't care what you do with it. But then that was where Prof. Williamson come in. Well, he came in when we were in about the 7th grade, 6th or 7th grade. And he was the one, he had discipline. And he was a man, not only that, but he was an educator too. But outside of that, I would say that my high school days were routine. The doctor discovered, well, the fact is I discovered it myself, that my heart was skipping a beat. I was about 8, 9 years old at that time. And I told my mother, and she checked me. And of course, we went right to the doctor. And it does skip. So I couldn't play in any athletics. They wouldn't let me play any athletics at all. And I'd play sandlot football with a coconut and play baseball, because that wasn't organized by the high school, so that they couldn't restrict that. But that, other than that, I would say it's just a routine. That, you went to your classes, and when the school was out, well, you went home. Because there wasn't not much else to do.
We're going to ask you to hold that thought while we do another tape change, okay?
Oh.
We're going to change tapes again.
Oh, gosh, we used up 2 of them.